In the evening of Friday, the 21st of January 2022, 48-year-old Xavier Yap watched his 11-year-old twin sons as they played in a playground. The twins were children with special needs. Xavier's heart was heavy as he ruminated about what he was about to do. He had been thinking about it a lot. It had to be done, you see. He had to put an end to all their mortal sufferings. He stopped them from playing after 10 minutes and carried his sons one by one to an open field and then led them by hand to a canal. There he strangled his boys one by one until they stopped struggling. He then submerged their faces in the water of the canal to ensure that they died. Why did Xavier Yap kill his sons?
I got nightmares in my head, I fear that the thoughts build up until I can't hear, that my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. Anxiety, filling up every space, no privacy.
Hi and welcome. Today's case is another case involving the death of children with special needs. The victims in today's case are 11-year-old twin brothers Ethan Yap and Aston Yap. At about 6:25 p.m. on Friday the 21st of January 2022, police in the Republic of Singapore received a distress call from a man. They rushed to a playground in a residential area where they saw a man waving at them from a canal which was in the vicinity. They walked up to him. He was 48-year-old Xavier Yap. Xavier told police that he was with his sons in the playground when he was attacked from behind and he lost consciousness. When he came to, his sons were missing. His sons were 11-year-old twins and they were both children with special needs. He said that he searched for them and found them by the canal dead. The police saw the motionless bodies of two young children. The children were pronounced dead by the paramedic who arrived at the scene. The police then began a manhunt for the killer. By this time, evening shadows had begun to fall and light was beginning to dim. On top of that, water was fast filling up the canal. This presented the police with the problem of crucial evidence being washed away. They therefore got sandbags which arrived within the hour, and the police placed the handbags across the canal at its mouth to prevent water from flowing in and contaminating the crime scene. While searching the area, the police found an ice pick, bits of clothing belonging to the boys, and they also found some gloves and masks, but these had nothing to do with the case. There were no CCTV cameras at the site to record footage of the incident. The police continued their search even after nightfall using floodlights and police dogs. The search ended at midnight with nothing else being found. The next day, Saturday the 22nd of January, the police went to all the homes in the neighborhood and made enquiries, and they also asked the residents for their dash cams and CCTV cameras. Members of the public also visited the area and left bouquets of flowers and lit candles for the dead boys. An interfaith prayer session led by 6 religious organizations was organized in the evening of Sunday the 23rd of January. In the meanwhile, Xavier was warded at a hospital because of some injuries that he said he had sustained when he was attacked. The police were not making any headway. This made them become suspicious of Xavier. The lead investigator later said in an interview that he felt that something was fishy right from the start. He didn't quite believe Xavier's version because it was not normal for 2 boys to be killed at the same time. Further, Xavier's injuries were minor. Xavier had said that he was hit from the back, but it was the front of his head that had injuries. Also, the wounds on his stomach were small puncture wounds, definitely not enough to kill, and his other injuries were rather superficial. The police asked Xavier to come for further questioning when he was discharged from hospital the next day, and it was then that Xavier confessed to the police that he killed his children. In his police statement, Xavier explained how and why he killed his children. Now for the backstory. Xavier was born in 1973 and worked as a senior engineer in a multinational company at the time of the children's deaths. He married a woman named Anna in 2007. Anna was married before and had a daughter from her earlier marriage when she married Xavier. The twin boys Ethan and Aston were born to the couple on the 10th of October 2010. When the children were born, the couple hired a domestic helper to help them with the children. Now, it was not long before they realized that all was not okay with the boys. In May of 2017, when both Ethan and Aston were 6 years old, they were diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, ASD in short, and also global development delay, GDD in short. ASD is a neurological disorder, i.e. it is a disorder of the nervous system that affects a person's perception and interaction with the surrounding world. GDD, on the other hand, is a disorder that affects the development of a person's neurosystem. According to my research, although they are different and distinct disorders, with autism affecting social interaction and GDD affecting the neurodevelopment of a child. But they have some overlapping characteristics in that they share some common social and cognitive traits. For example, in both disorders, children may experience speech delays, problems with understanding and communication, have problems with fine motor skills like buttoning their shirts. Ethan and Aston's disorders caused them to be non-verbal. They were 11 years old and they couldn't speak. They also struggled with social and developmental issues. It was taking them longer to reach their developmental milestones. Now, usually when children are diagnosed with developmental issues, right, the parents become reconciled to that fact and do whatever they can for their children, like for instance, something important like sending them to a school for special children where they are taught differently. It's not rocket science, is it? That's what you have to do. These children are not able to cope in a school for children who do not have special needs. But no, that was not the case with Ethan and Aston. Although I understand that there are some 22 government-funded special education schools and experts had already recommended that these children be sent to one, the children were instead sent to a mainstream primary school when they were 9 years old. Why, you might ask? Well, it was because reportedly their mother Anna couldn't come to terms with the fact that their children had problems. So looks like she regarded them as normal because she wanted them to be normal. She appeared to be in denial. So she refused to send them to a special school. Instead, these two special needs children who couldn't speak were sent to a mainstream primary school where they struggled. Of course they did. Initially, the boys were accompanied to class either by their mother or the domestic helper because, as you know, they couldn't speak. But slowly the mother began to withdraw from the kids. Xavier, however, was always there for the boys. He was a dedicated father who spent his time after work with the boys, helping them with their daily needs and their studies as they were struggling with peers who were far ahead of them. But the mother, she couldn't accept that her son has special needs. Looks like the more the children struggled, the more she withdrew, instead of being there for her boys. Her boys whom she decided to enroll in a mainstream school. Not only did she withdraw, she apparently also often got angry with the children. Matters came to a head in January 2022 when the mainstream school decided to assess the twins to see if they could continue in the school. This increased Anna's stress, frustration, and depression, causing Xavier to conclude that Anna had given up on the boys. The boy's plight increased with the looming assessment. The hopelessness of his son's predicament caused Xavier to entertain suicidal thoughts. These thoughts then also grew to encompass not only killing himself but the boys as well. He thought that his boys were better off dead because they would be bullied and also have no one to look after them when he and Anna were gone. He also formed the opinion that Anna would want the freedom of not having to care for the boys, as she could not accept that the children were special. With the boys gone, Anna's burden would be lifted. With him and his sons gone, Xavier figured that Anna and his stepdaughter would be free to live their lives. It was with these thoughts circling in his head that he decided to kill his sons and then to kill himself. A murder-suicide, that's what it was going to be. With the ideation of murder-suicide firmly fixed in his head, Xavier bought an ice pick sometime in December 2021 with which to kill himself. He carried out his plan on Friday the 21st of January 2022. He drove the boys to a playground near his house that he had chosen earlier because it was quiet. It was about 4:45 in the evening. He let the boys play for about 10 minutes. The playground had an open field, and a forest nearby, and it was very quiet. Xavier then carried the boys one by one to the canal. Once there, he led them to the sheltered part of the canal. They went with their father like lambs going to slaughter. Even lambs instinctively know what is about to happen, and they bleed piteously until the end, when the silence of the lambs is deafening. But these two innocent, helpless children lay in the arms of probably the one person they trusted as he carried them and then walked them to their tragic demise. Xavier killed Ethan first. He used a stick and pressed hard against Ethan's throat, but the stick broke. He then placed his forearm on Ethan's throat and pressed down, intending to end his life. Ethan struggled until he struggled no more. Xavier then placed Ethan's face in the canal water to make sure that Ethan died, just in case he hadn't died from the strangulation. Now all this while, Aston was standing nearby and he was watching. Can you imagine that? The poor child. Did he realize what was happening? I hope not. Xavier then killed Aston, but he killed him in a slightly different manner. He didn't use a stick. He tried to strangle Aston by pressing his forearm on Aston's neck, but they both fell to the ground. Xavier then climbed on top of Aston and pressed his forearm on Aston's neck until Aston stopped struggling and became motionless. Xavier then also submerged Aston's face in the canal water. With both boys dead, Xavier proceeded to kill himself, but the ice pick proved to be an ineffective weapon. He then hit his head with a stone and a branch of a tree, but to no avail. He gave up and called his wife, but she didn't answer. He then called the police. According to Xavier, he decided to lie about being attacked so that when his lie was found out, he would be given the death penalty. Seeking the death penalty was his novel way of committing suicide, looks like. Xavier waited for the police after sitting on the ground with the heads of his sons resting on his lap. I can't imagine the torture of his thoughts as he waited. Xavier confessed to the police the next day, Saturday the 22nd, and he was arrested at 11:15 p.m. on the same day. The autopsy results confirmed that the boys had died from strangulation. Xavier's DNA was also found on the son's necks. The evidence matched his confession, and he was charged on Monday, the 24th of January, with the murder of only Ethan. The penalty for murder in Singapore is death by hanging. The charge was read out by video link to Xavier, who remained expressionless. The prosecutor requested that Xavier be further remanded for 1 week for further investigations, including a visit to the crime scene, which request was granted. Xavier was taken back to the crime scene on the 27th of January for reconstruction of the crime. It was then that he broke down and cried, saying that he was depressed. Xavier was warded at a mental health center for a psychiatric evaluation, and he was monitored as he was considered to be a suicide risk. Xavier was diagnosed with major depressive disorder with moderate severity at the time he committed the offense. His depression was also aggravated when he discovered that his wife was having an affair. Xavier's medical reports state that he had been suffering from major depressive disorder, which I shall now call MDD. He had been suffering for it for 3 years prior to the killing. The MDD had gotten worse over the months leading up to the killings, with him having homicidal and suicidal thoughts. According to the doctor who examined him, Xavier was suffering from constant and serious MDD around the time of the killings, so much so that he didn't know that the act of killing was wrong. As such, the partial defense of diminished responsibility was available to Xavier, reducing the charge from murder to culpable homicide not amounting to murder. The prosecution accordingly reduced his charge of murdering Ethan to culpable homicide not amounting to murder. In February 2022, Xavier was also charged with a culpable homicide not amounting to murder of Aston Yap. With this reduction, Xavier no longer faced the death penalty. The maximum sentence for this offense was life imprisonment. This must have been a relief for Xavier because he no longer wanted to die. He now wanted to live. He said that he wanted to live for his 80-year-old mother. Although he suffered from severe MDD, he was declared to be of sound mind and such fit to plead. Xavier didn't waste court's time at all and pleaded guilty to both the lesser charges of culpable homicide not amounting to murder. Together with his guilty plea, Xavier also handed a letter to court that he had written for, in his words, "Your Honor's kind consideration." The letter explained why he killed his children, his wife's callous and unreasonable attitude towards her children, and her extramarital affair. He states in the letter he now wants to live for his 80-year-old mother and pleaded for leniency in the sentencing. I will read the salient parts of his letter. By the end of 2021, my MDD's condition was exacerbated by my wife Anna's unreasonable behavior towards my 2 sons. Apart from not willing to accept their special needs, Anna's expectations on them to behave like normal children had gotten utterly unreasonable and unrealistic. Physical punishments and scoldings were becoming common whenever the boys failed to meet her requirements. In addition, my MDD was further aggravated after finding out that she was cheating on me. By the beginning of January 2022, being overwhelmed by sadness and hopelessness, I had totally lost faith that my 2 sons will be taken care of in the future, especially when I'm gone. Suicidal thoughts became more frequent, in part believing that bringing my 2 sons along with me would end their unfair sufferings, and in part will free my wife from her burden and unleashing her freedom to pursue happiness with her newfound love. Bearing no ill grudges, I thought that with me and my 2 sons gone, theirs and my sufferings will be over. That is the main reason on why I decided to act and did what I did on that day. Shortly after being incarcerated in Changi prison, it was revealed to me by my family members and friends that my wife Anna is not even saddened by the demise of her 2 sons, as she started inviting her lover to stay at our house. As a mother, she even threw away her 2 sons' belongings. She has crossed the boundary that I could no longer tolerate. In no way whatever karma that I will receive from God will I turn the other side of my cheek on that matter. Henceforth, I promised my dear mother to reveal everything on why I acted the way I did and for what I did on that fateful day, and to bravely live for her. Therefore, shamefacedly, I am pleading your honor for leniency in your judgment, in considering my MDD severity and the ordeals that I had gone through. On the 15th of August 2023, Xavier Yap attended court for his sentencing. At that time, divorce proceedings were underway between him and his wife. His defense team mitigated for him for a lesser sentence. They said that his MDD, his major depressive disorder, was aggravated by his wife's treatment of Ethan and Aston, as he had seen cane marks on the children, and also his discovery of her infidelity. Xavier apparently found out that his wife was having an affair since 2021. These led to the tragic incident of the death of Ethan and Aston. To add to his grief, he later learned that she had checked into the hotel with her lover on that very tragic day that her children died. The prosecution, however, countered that the offences were serious and the victims were vulnerable. The judge noted that 2 issues had to be considered in the sentencing process. Firstly, what is the appropriate sentence for each of the charges? And secondly, should the sentences run concurrently or consecutively? Concurrently means together, and consecutively means one after the other. The prosecution sought a term of 7 to 10 years of imprisonment for each of the offence of culpable homicide not amounting to murder. And they also sought that the terms of the imprisonment be served consecutively. The defence, on the other hand, argued for a prison term not exceeding 5 years for each of the 2 charges, and also for the terms to be served concurrently. In Xavier's case, what was argued by the parties was whether considerations of deterrence and retribution should govern the judge's decision in sentencing, or whether the judge should prioritize Xavier's mental condition and rule that rehabilitation of the prisoner is the primary consideration for sentencing. The grounds advanced by the prosecution for a deterrent and retributive sentence were that, number 1, Xavier knew what he was doing and he was able to reason and weigh the consequences of his action, and he proceeded to carry them out anyway. And secondly, when he failed in his suicide attempt, he had the presence of mind to devise the false story about the unknown attacker so as to receive a death sentence. On the other hand, the defense argued that the sentencing appropriate consideration should be rehabilitation as opposed to deterrence and retributive justice, mainly because, number 1, the facts of the case were unusual. Number 2, Xavier had no previous convictions. Number 3, he had cooperated fully with the police. Number 4, he is remorseful and has pleaded guilty, thus preventing a trial. Fifthly, the risk of him reoffending was low. And finally, his judgment was impaired at the time of the offences. The prosecution's grounds for 7 to 10 years imprisonment were, firstly, the killing of the children was premeditated. Number 2, the victims were vulnerable. Number 3, Xavier, being their father, was in a position of trust. The defense relied on some cases to argue for a term of 5 years for each offense. I will deal with them later on. Now, as to whether the prison terms should run concurrently or consecutively, the prosecution argued that, number 1, the offences were not just a single transaction. It was a single transaction with double killings. There were 2 separate strangulations and 2 lives were taken. As such, the sentences should run consecutively, i.e. one after the other. The defense, on the other hand, argued that the prison terms should run concurrently because the offences were a part of a single transaction. Their reasoning for this were, number 1, the proximity of time and place when the offences were committed made it a single transaction. Number 2, there was a continuity of purpose because Xavier wanted to end the sufferings of both Ethan and Aston. And number 3, the sentences should run concurrently as a token of judicial justice. Now, after considering the arguments of both the parties, the judge agreed with the prosecution that the sentencing consideration in Xavier's case was deterrence and retribution as opposed to rehabilitation. In the judge's view, suffering from a mental disorder at the time of the offense does not necessarily mean that rehabilitation should be the consideration. The factors that influenced the judges were, firstly, Xavier knew and understood the nature and consequence of his actions. Secondly, he killed his children so as to end their sufferings and to relieve his wife of the burden of having 2 special children. Thirdly, he was affected by his suspicion that his wife was having an affair which transpired to be true and her physical abuse of the children. As such, his crimes were based on reasoned out facts and not fantasy or fiction. Fourthly, his crimes were serious and heinous. Fifthly, his victims were vulnerable. Number 6, he was in a position of trust vis-a-vis his victims. And number 7, the offences were premeditated. In asking for a term of 5 years, the defense relied on a couple of cases. The judge distinguished these cases from the facts of Xavier's case. In the first case, the defense relied upon the perpetrator killed his wife because he suffered from a delusional disorder of the persecutory type when he killed the victim. His deluded thinking led him to believe wrongly that his wife was using black magic on him at the time of the offense. As such, his deluded thinking was based on fantasy or fiction and not fact. In Xavier's case, the underlying reason for his crimes was based on facts and not fiction or fantasy. His mental responsibility was therefore greater. Secondly, the defense relied on a case where the court gave a light sentence as an act of judicial mercy. The judge, however, said that there were no exceptional circumstances in Xavier's case to merit judicial mercy. The judge then sentenced Xavier to 7 years imprisonment for each crime as opposed to the 10 years advocated by the prosecution and the 5 years asked for the defense. To justify his sentence of 7 years, the judge also relied on the degree of premeditation. Xavier had thought of and planned the killings. Also, submerging his children's faces in water after strangling them was an aggravating factor, justifying more than 5 years. In the judge's opinion, the 10 years sought by the prosecution was too long because Xavier pleaded guilty and he was suffering from MDD at the time of the offences, which significantly impaired his judgment. The judge also ordered that the sentences were to run consecutively because he agreed with the prosecution that the offences was not a single transaction as there were two different victims. Also, Xavier's offences infringed two distinct legally protected interests, that of Ethan and Aston. Further, the manner in which he killed the two children were also distinct and not entirely the same. Also, it would be morally unjust not to punish him adequately for depriving two victims of their lives. With this sentence, Xavier will have to serve 14 years altogether in prison. Now, this case initiated a discussion in the Singapore Parliament about issues facing special children as well as their caregivers, talking about solutions for problems facing the people concerned and what assistance could be provided so that there is no repeat of such offences. This case drew feelings of grief and sympathy from the public who were appalled by the crimes. Further, Xavier's mother, when she was interviewed, said that in her dreams she still plays with Ethan and Aston and that she misses them and longs to see them again. According to her, the children used to visit her often and they were always reluctant to leave and they would hide their shoes when it was time to go home. This news further tore at the hearts of the Singapore public. It was a tragic incident. Tragic because the victims were children. Tragic because they were children with special needs. Tragic because their own father, whose paramount duty is to protect them, killed them because a mental disorder drove him to take their innocent and precious lives. Tragic because their own mother mistreated and rejected them. Tragic because their father felt it necessary to demolish the family structure so that the mother can be with her lover and carry on with her life. I had in my earlier video on Suchana Seth talked briefly about the motivations for filicide. I leave a link to that case in the description below. In Xavier's case, I think that the motivation was altruistic. Now, we haven't heard from Anna, so we don't know her side of the story. But if what Xavier said is true, I think that she shares a responsibility in this tragedy. You can't be in denial forever. You have to move on and accept the truth and do what is best for your children. Otherwise, you will drag yourself and the entire family into a living hell. Again, if what Xavier said is true, it looks like Anna washed her hands off her children. She rejected them because they were not normal through no fault of theirs. Maybe her story is different. We do not know. We haven't heard her side. For her sake, I hope that she doesn't feel guilty, because if she did, she would be forever haunted. That's it from me. Thanks for your time. I'll see you in my next video. Until then, take care, be vigilant, and be kind. Bye.